Hi, everybody. Thank you to the organizers for placing me between Facebook and Gary Kasparov. Thank you to you guys for sticking around so late in the conference. I hope you have enjoyed yourself and that you will continue to enjoy yourself. Today, I'd like to talk about the theme of the conference and how to motivate people to add more, how to motivate them to do more good. To do things like to give to charity, or to volunteer more, or to vote, to do things as simple as to be quiet in the conference room, or to clean up after themselves in the office kitchen, and also to do things that might be relevant for your companies, like to contribute more content on their digital platforms, on your digital platforms, or to, for your employees to be more careful with privacy issues and security issues. So those are the kinds of questions that I ask. How do you get people to pay a small cost of their own to benefit others? How do you get them to add more? When I first started working on this project, I was collaborating with a power company in California. How many from California? A few people still. And we were signing people up for a program that helps to prevent blackouts, which you may remember were a big problem in California in the 2000s. And this program, it's a standard demand-side management program if you're in the energy business. And what it does is you sign up for a small device that can slightly reduce the energy consumption of a particular appliance, usually an air conditioner, in some cases some other big appliances. And for the most part, this device is turned off. It doesn't come on. But if there's a risk of a blackout because there's huge demand for some reason, or because there's a power plant that's going down, then this device can be turned on by the utility. It slightly backs off on the amount that your air conditioner is cooling. And if lots and lots of people have signed up for this, that can help to prevent a blackout. Program's great. When people participate in the program, they're super excited about it. They think that it's very convenient. They don't even know when these devices come on. They like to participate, but they don't. So the utility came to me and they said, OK, we have this great thing. How do we get people to participate? And I said, I don't know, but I can go read about it. And I went back to the economics literature. I read about it a bit. And I suggested that what we do is make one small change to the way the utility was recruiting people for the program. They had been asking people to sign up by sending them a letter, telling them about all the benefits of the program, and then asking them to call into a hotline. And our team suggested that instead what they do is have them sign up on a sign-up sheet that we would post near the mailboxes in their buildings. It looked like this. Not super high-tech, but despite that, it tripled participation in the program. For those of you who have ever done direct mail advertising, our sign-up rates were around 9%, and you know that that's actually fairly hard to achieve. So why? Why did that work? Well, you all know people care a lot about what others think of them. They want to be seen as good citizens in society. They want to be seen as contributors and not as mooches. And this is a big part of why people do good. So perhaps from that perspective, it's not so surprising that when you go from a setting that's private, you're in the privacy of your living room, you're worrying about what to put on the table for dinner, how to pay your taxes, whatever it is that's your current headache. For us Americans right now, it's how to pay your taxes and what to do about the election. And you're not really worried about things like, should I sign up for these kinds of programs? But as soon as you take that and you put it in an environment where somebody can get some credit, then suddenly, maybe they care a little bit more. Maybe now they're more willing to do a little bit of good. When my team tries to motivate people to do more good, to add more, what we do is think about how can we provide people as much credit as possible for doing their good deed. In the language of finance, how can we give them as high as possible a reputational return for doing good deeds? And maybe in that case, they'll invest more in good deeds. Now, of course, unlike finance, people don't think so carefully and so deliberately about the good deeds that they're doing. They're not thinking about them in the same way that they're thinking about their stock portfolios. Rather, they get warm, fuzzy feelings about doing good, or they get guilty feelings when they don't do good. So what we think is really going on is not that people are thinking carefully about their reputations so much as they have this system that was shaped by reputations for doing good deeds. Our job is to turn that system on, and we do that by thinking very much about reputations, even though most people aren't themselves thinking about reputations. When we do work on this, the thing that we do in order to make sure that we don't leave any credit on the table is we go through a very short checklist, and my goal today is to walk you through that checklist. And in fact, I've already shown you the first item on that checklist. It's to increase observability, to make sure that people find out about good deeds. To go from a situation like the one where nobody was, finding out about whether you signed up for the program, to one where your neighbors could see that you had signed up, that you had written your name when they passed by their mailbox. Let me show you another example. This is from a collaboration with a nonprofit called America Votes that tries to get people to go out to the polls. There's a bunch of these nonprofits. What they do is they send out these snail mail letters to people, and they test the bejesus out of these letters. They really tweak them. They A/B test them in dozens and dozens of versions, and they try to design the letter that most powerfully motivates people to go out to the polls. And we were helping one of these organizations do that. Usually these organizations only do one side or the other, Democrats or Republicans. This one happens to focus on Democrats. So what you see in front of you is this letter. It begins, "Dear so-and-so, you're a voter, blah, 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 blah." And what we said was, why don't you add the following to your letter? You may be called after the election to discuss your experience at the polls. And our goal here was to make going to the polls feel more observable, that somebody actually might care about the fact that you had gone to the polls. And this one little sentence increased the impact of an already industry-leading letter by 50%, which reduced the cost of getting out another vote from $70 to $40. Increasing observability, it's been used to do all sorts of other things, like get people to give more money to national parks, or to give more blood by listing names of people in local newsletters. It's also been used to get people to pay their taxes by listing the names of people who haven't paid their taxes on websites. And then people are awfully quick to want to get off those websites. And then what about this one? You guys recognize that car? Everybody recognizes that car. The designers of Toyota presumably realized that if they made the car look very unique, kind of ugly, then well, people will be more likely to want to drive it, to signal to everybody from a mile away that they were contributing to the environment. So that's the first item on the checklist. It's to increase observability, and I want to tie this to one additional application which might be relevant to you guys. What you see in front of you is what I think is one of the key places where you can increase observability if you're running a digital platform, and that's the profile of your users. And what you see here is my Yelp profile, which has done a fairly terrible job of increasing observability around contributions to the platform. I've contributed a fair amount to the Yelp platform. If you look carefully, you can see that I even have 95 posts and have posted 11 photos. The average person has 0. And despite that, this profile does fairly little for my reputation. It doesn't really let me show off anything that I actually care about. So what I would encourage you to do is, as you're thinking about designing your own platforms, to think about this as ground zero for motivating people to contribute to that platform and for providing them the return on their investment when they do so. OK, so we've increased observability, but there is a key problem, which is that despite the fact that you might have done that, people will often walk around or try to get away from the opportunity to do good. And the example I like to give comes from the Salvation Army. How many of you are familiar with that? OK, not so many Americans. And so in America, it's very common. Around the holiday season, you see folks standing outside of supermarkets or other retail stores. They have those little Santa hats, and they have the little bucket. And what they're doing is collecting a little bit of spare change for the charity, the Salvation Army. And in this particular study, what happened was that the researchers teamed up with the Salvation Army volunteers to try to find ways to increase donations to the public good, to the charity, excuse me. And one of the things that they did was they had the individuals stand either in front of one door or both doors, and then they checked to see two things. So number one is, did contributions go up? And number two is, where did people go out? And what they found was that when the Salvation Army volunteers stood in front of just one door, people went out the other door. And this teaches us a lesson. It teaches us that people will try to take advantage of plausible excuses like, oh, there was a magazine I needed there, or I wanted that chocolate bar, or oh, it's just closer to my car, in order to try to get around doing good deeds. And so we always tell people you should make sure to eliminate plausible deniability as much as possible so that people can't take advantage of those kinds of opportunities. And this comes from the game theoretic concept of common knowledge, and it relates to reputations in the following way. Common knowledge is just the idea that when something happens, it needs to be the case that when it happens, everybody knows it happens. Then it generates common knowledge. When it comes to reputations, common knowledge is really important, because when somebody does a good deed or does a bad deed, and that doesn't generate common knowledge, then we can't be coordinated on whether to give them a reputational return or not. And reputations are to some extent social. There's an element of coordination. So what we need is for when you ask somebody to do the good deed, if they fail to do that, for that to generate common knowledge, for there to be no plausible way they can claim, oh, I didn't mean to do that, or I didn't mean to actually defect in this case. So that's where that's coming from. Funny story about that study. One of the things that the researchers found was that when they put people in front of both doors, people stopped coming out of the store at all. And they found out the hard way there was actually a third door, a small utility door on the side where people used to go to take out the recycling, and that people were now sneaking out that door. So when you eliminate plausible deniability, you got to cover all your bases. All right, so you've increased observability, you've eliminated plausible deniability. One more item on the checklist. And that item is to communicate expectations. The reason for this is that there are a lot of contexts in which you're expected to do good, but also a lot of contexts where you're not expected to do good. Think about standing on the right on the escalator. In some places, you're supposed to stand on the right so that people can go by on the left. Japan is like this, Tokyo is like this, some places in the United States are like this. But in some places, it's okay to stand on both sides of the escalator, and nobody really minds. Of course, it's better if we all stand on the right and let people go by, but it's only the norm in some places. In fact, that's a general thing. It's often the case that you're expected to do good, but often not. And consequently, our psychology is very sensitive to cues of whether we're expected to do good in this particular situation. And so if you want people to add in this particular situation, you got to tell them that. Tell them, do good in this situation. Lots of ways to do that. One very common way that you see nowadays in the nudging community, which I'm a part of, is that you simply tell people, hey, lots of other people are doing this. In fact, the company OPower is a behavioral science company that developed all around this idea, and all it does is send people letters in the mail that tells them how their energy consumption compares to that of their peers, and it highlights to them when their peers are doing a better job conserving energy. But sometimes you can't tell people how others are doing. Maybe you don't know. Maybe they're not doing so well. And so there are other ways to do this. For instance, we call this an injunctive norm. It's a very fancy way of telling people, just tell them what you want from them. There's also this, which we call a framing effect, which is just a simple way of reframing a mundane thing into a contribution to the public good. That letter that I showed you also had this. You're a voter. We call that an identity frame. That's another way of communicating expectations. And here again, I'll bring back up this question of digital platforms. And once again, I'll pick on Yelp. You can see here that Yelp has done a fairly bad job, again, of communicating to me the various ways in which I can contribute, and also translating that into things that I think of already as public goods. There's lots of ways in which I could use Yelp to actually contribute to my friends and my community in ways that I care about, and yet they're not really communicated here. So again, I encourage you to think about the profile as ground zero for increasing observability, but also for communicating expectations. So there you go. There's your checklist. When you yourself are trying to motivate people to try to add something, to try to contribute more, please feel free to use this checklist, and also to reach out to me if you're trying to do so and trying to find ways to apply it in your particular setting. I'm very easy to find. I have the only person with my name in the world.